I need to tell you about a technology that actually worked. Not a theory, not speculation, a real functioning transportation system that moved millions of people for decades. And then it vanished. Between 1870 and 1950, compressed air vehicles, cars, trains, locomotives, were manufactured, sold commercially, and used around the world. Hundreds of them. In France, Switzerland, America, Cuba, England, everywhere. They didn't need gasoline, they didn't need coal, they didn't produce smoke or fumes, they ran on compressed air, just air. And for 80 years, they competed successfully against steam and gasoline. Then suddenly, around 1950, they disappeared. Not because they didn't work, they worked fine. Not because they were too expensive, they were profitable, not because nobody wanted them. Cities had been using them for decades, but because someone decided they shouldn't exist anymore, and I can prove it. And let me start with the facts, because this story is so strange that I need to prove every claim before I can even ask the question. Who made this technology disappear, and why? Fact. In 1876, a French-Polish engineer named Louis Makarsky invented a compressed air propulsion system for trams. The system was tested in Paris in 1876. It worked. In 1879, it was introduced to the Nantes tramway in France. By 1900, Nantes had a fleet of 94 compressed air trams running every day. These weren't experimental vehicles, they were production trams, carrying paying passengers on regular routes through the streets of Nantes. Oh, the system worked like this. Compressed air was generated at a central station, powered by water turbines from the Loire River, and stored in massive tanks. Trams would pull into filling stations along their routes and connect to charging pipes. Fill-up time, about 2 to 3 minutes. The air was compressed to 480 pounds per square inch, nearly 5 times the pressure in a modern car tire. Each tram carried 9 air tanks beneath the passenger compartment. But here's what made Makarsky's system brilliant. He solved the icing problem. When compressed air expands, it gets cold, really cold. Cold enough to freeze moisture in the air and turn your engine cylinders into blocks of ice. Makarsky's solution? Heat the air after it leaves the storage tanks, but before it enters the engine. He did this by bubbling the compressed air through tanks of boiling water, called a bouillotte, which added hot water vapor to the airstream and kept everything above freezing. This reheating system increased the range between fill-ups from about 4 miles to 7 miles, and it worked every single day for 38 years. The Nantes compressed air trams continued operation until 1917, when they were replaced by electric trams. One preserved Makarsky tramcar still exists today at the M2R Museum in Nantes. Think about that. 38 years. That's longer than most subway systems have been running. That's longer than the entire history of commercial aviation, from the Wright brothers to the moon landing. This wasn't a failed experiment. This was proven, reliable public transportation. Fact. Between 1890 and 1902, 10 compressed air trams operated in Bern, Switzerland. The Bern system ran along a 3.1-kilometer line from Bern-Graben via Bern railway station to the cemetery. Operating pressure, 480 pounds per square inch. Speed, 9.3 miles per hour. Range, about 7 miles between fill-ups. Each tram consumed roughly 2,100 liters of compressed air per run. The compressed air was generated by a compressor driven by a water Jonval turbine powered by the Aar River. The filling station was at Bern-Graben. Here's what's interesting. The line had a built-in advantage. Cars on the return trip were going downhill, so if they ran out of air, they could still coast back to the filling station using gravity. But filling still took time, so they built 4 filling connections that could be used by 2 to 3 cars simultaneously. 4 cars were en route service at any time, while the rest were in the maintenance shed. The system ran for 12 years. Not a prototype, not a demonstration. A working public transit system that moved thousands of people. Fact. In 1878, American inventor Robert Hardy developed compressed air locomotives for the Second Avenue Railroad in New York City. Hardy's system was backed by General Herman Haupt, a civil engineer who became one of the biggest advocates for compressed air vehicles in America. Haupt wrote extensively about the advantages of air cars, using the Hardy engine as his source material. The locomotives were built by the Pneumatic Tramway Engine Company. They had 4 tanks storing compressed air at high pressure with a range of about 8 miles, 13 kilometers. And here's the scale of the operation. A building-sized 1,500 horsepower compressing station was constructed in New York specifically to supply these locomotives. 1,500 horsepower. That's not a prototype. That's industrial infrastructure. The Hardy system operated in New York from 1878 through the 1890s. It was a more advanced version of Makarsky's engine. It used reheating of the air plus regenerative braking, which meant the engine could act as a compressor during braking, adding more compressed air back to the tanks. This was sophisticated engineering. And it worked. Fact. In 1869, Charles B. Hodges created an air-powered engine commercially successful enough that hundreds were sold to the mining industry. This was in 1869. Before the automobile even existed, compressed air vehicles were being manufactured and sold. Oh, fact. The H.K. Porter Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, manufactured more than 400 compressed air locomotives between 1900 and the 1950s. Porter built rugged, specialized locomotives using interchangeable parts, pistons, wheels, and tanks in various sizes that could be combined to suit specific requirements. Their compressed air locomotives stored pressurized air at 800 to 1,200 pounds per square inch, significantly more than steam boilers, which rarely exceeded 300 pounds per square inch. Because of this extreme pressure, the tanks were built with inch-thick steel walls held together with massive rivets. The typical design was compound. High-pressure air moved one cylinder, then exhaust fed a second, lower-pressure cylinder. Between stages, an air reheater warmed the cooled air using ambient air. These locomotives were used in mines, factories, textile mills, refineries, munitions plants, food processing facilities, and sugarcane plantations. Why? No sparks, no flames, no toxic fumes. In underground mines where methane gas could cause explosions, compressed air locomotives were the only safe option for decades. In 1915, Porter built a massive 3-tank locomotive for a Cuban sugar plantation. A 3-inch pipeline ran 7 miles through the cane fields for refueling. It operated flawlessly, eliminating the constant fire risk. One Porter locomotive, numbered 3290, was built in 1905 for homestake mining. It operated continuously until August 1985. 80 years of service. That locomotive is now at the Arizona Railway Museum. These weren't prototypes. These were production vehicles, manufactured by the hundreds, sold commercially, operating reliably for decades. Now here's where it gets interesting. The technology didn't just work. It had massive advantages over gasoline. Advantage number 1, no emissions. Compressed air engines exhaust nothing but cold air. No smoke, no carbon monoxide, no toxic gases. In cities with narrow streets, this was huge. The Makarsky system was specifically promoted for use in congested streets and tunnels because it wouldn't disturb horses or fill carriages with soot like steam engines. Advantage number 2, no fuel costs. You're not burning anything. You're just compressing air with a stationary compressor, usually powered by water, wind, or electricity. In 1900, the cost to run a compressed air tram in Nantes was a fraction of the cost of a coal-powered steam tram. Advantage number 3, safety, no fire, no boiler explosions, no risk of fuel ignition. In mines, where methane gas could cause catastrophic explosions, compressed air locomotives were the only safe option for decades. That's why they dominated underground mining from the 1900s through the 1950s. Advantage number 4, simplicity. A compressed air engine has fewer moving parts than an internal combustion engine. No spark plugs, no carburetor, no fuel injection, no exhaust system. Maintenance was minimal. Reliability was high. Advantage number 5, free air conditioning. As compressed air expands, it gets cold, really cold. Early compressed air vehicles literally produced cold air as a byproduct. In hot climates, this was air conditioning built into the engine. So why did this technology disappear? Let me tell you the official explanations, then what doesn't add up. Official explanation number 1, range. Compressed air vehicles had limited range, 7 to 8 miles before refilling. True, but not a problem for trams or mining locomotives on fixed routes with filling stations. And early gasoline cars had the same limitation. First gas stations appeared 1905. Before that, you bought gasoline in cans at pharmacies. Range wasn't the deal breaker claimed. Official explanation number 2, speed. Compressed air vehicles were slow, 10 to 20 miles per hour. True, but in 1900 everything was slow. Horse carriages, 5 to 10 miles per hour. Early automobiles, rarely over 25 miles per hour. Speed only mattered later with highways. For urban transport, compressed air was adequate. Official explanation. Number 3, efficiency. Compressing air requires energy. You lose efficiency in compression/expansion. People always make this argument. But here's the thing. For 80 years, it did compete successfully. If so inefficient, why were hundreds manufactured and used for decades? Why did not operate 94 trams for nearly 40 years? The efficiency argument only makes sense if you ignore 80 years of profitable operation. Now let me tell you what actually happened, because it wasn't about efficiency. It was about oil. In 1859, the first commercial oil well was drilled in Pennsylvania. By the 1880s, oil was cheap and plentiful. By the 1900s, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled 90% of oil refining in the United States, and gasoline, which had been a useless byproduct of kerosene production, suddenly had a use, powering automobiles. The Model T was introduced in 1908. It ran on gasoline. Within 10 years, millions of Model Ts were on the road. And here's the critical point. Every Model T that ran on gasoline was a customer for the oil industry. Every compressed air vehicle was not a customer. Compressed air doesn't make oil companies rich. It doesn't require refineries, pipelines, distribution networks. You can compress air anywhere there's a water wheel, a windmill, or an electric motor. So what happened to compressed air technology between 1900 and 1950? The same thing that happened to electric cars, steam cars, and every other alternative to gasoline. They were systematically pushed out of the market. Let me show you how this happened, because it wasn't obvious. It was gradual and deliberate. Step 1. Control the infrastructure. In the early 1900s, multiple competing technologies existed. Steam, electric, compressed air, gasoline. But gasoline had one advantage: John D. Rockefeller. Standard Oil used its massive wealth to build gas stations everywhere. By 1920, there were gas stations in every town. If you wanted to drive cross-country, you needed gasoline, because that's the only fuel infrastructure that existed. Compressed air filling stations? There were a few, but nobody invested in expanding them. Why would they? There was no profit in selling compressed air. Electric charging stations? Same problem. No recurring revenue. Gasoline won, not because it was better, but because the oil industry built the infrastructure first. Step 2. Cheap oil floods the market. In 1901, the Spindletop oil gusher in Texas produced 100,000 barrels per day. Oil became so cheap that gasoline cost pennies per gallon. Compressed air vehicles couldn't compete on price when gasoline was practically free. But this wasn't natural market competition. It was artificially cheap oil from massive overproduction. And once everyone was dependent on gasoline, prices went back up. But by then, the alternatives were gone. Step 3. Suppress competing technologies. This is where it gets dark. In the 1920s and 1930s, multiple inventors developed improved compressed air cars. In 1926, Lee Barton Williams of Pittsburgh retrofitted a gasoline motor to run primarily on compressed air. In 1926, F.E. Kenny built a similar compressed air car. In 1932, Roy J. Myers built another prototype. In 1934, Johannes Wardenier announced the world's first fuelless automobile powered entirely by compressed air. All had working prototypes, real vehicles that drove. None went into production. Why? According to historical records, the technology was suppressed heavily by the petroleum industry. That's not speculation. That's documented. The pattern was consistent. Inventors built prototypes, demonstrated publicly. Newspapers covered enthusiastically. Then they sought investors for manufacturing. And that's where it stopped. Oil companies bought patents and shelved them, or buried inventors with legal challenges, or simply refused to allow compressed air filling stations at service stations. Without filling infrastructure, cars couldn't be practical. Without consumers, no market. Without market, no investment. Systematic suppression through infrastructure control. Then, something stranger, by the 1930s, air engine disappeared from engineering textbooks. Compressed air transportation stopped being taught. William Lawrence Saunders, a major advocate, died suddenly in 1931 while on vacation. After his death, Ingersoll Rand, the world's largest compressed air corporation, changed leadership. The new CEO was secretive, paranoid, turned in annual reports on a single folded sheet of paper, wouldn't be photographed. Ingersoll Rand's compressed air magazine stopped mentioning air cars. The magazine that once promoted pneumatic transportation acted like it didn't exist. Interest dwindled, not because the technology failed, because the conversation stopped. Textbooks stopped mentioning it. Industry magazines stopped covering it. Investors stopped funding it. By 1940, compressed air vehicles had virtually disappeared from public consciousness, except in mines, where they operated safely for 50 more years. Now let me fast forward to the 2000s. The same pattern repeated. In 1996, French engineer Guy Negre founded Motor Development International, MDI. Negre was a former Formula One engine developer. He understood high-performance design. Starting in 1997, he developed compressed air engines for automotive use. By 2004, MDI had working prototypes with multiple patents, the Minicat and the AirPod. Specifications: top speed 70 kilometers per hour, range 200 kilometers, about 125 miles, refill time 2 to 3 minutes at high-pressure station, or 4 hours using household electricity. Cost: 1 to 3 euros per fill. Zero emissions, no batteries, no rare earth minerals, no lithium, no cobalt, just air. Carbon fiber tanks, lighter, safer. If they failed, they'd crack, not explode. In 2007, Tata Motors, a major Indian automaker, bought exclusive rights for $30 million. The plan? Integrate compressed air engines into the Nano, their ultra-low-cost car targeted at $2,500. Hundreds of millions of Indians would access zero-emission transportation. Worldwide media covered it. Journalists visited MDI's facility. The vehicles worked. Tata promised production by 2012. Then, nothing. By 2009, all mention disappeared from Tata's website. By 2012, project shelved. No production, no explanation. December 2009, Tata's VP of engineering. Limited range and low temperatures causing difficulties. But 2016, MDI's CEO, guy's son. We never said mini cats in India. Tata bought rights to develop their own cars using our engines. So which is it? Technical problems or Tata's own development? Why remove all archives? Why delete press releases? Or why erase a $30 million investment? Gay Negra died 2016. The 2007 press release, live on Tata's site for 16 years, finally disappeared. Why did 80 years of working technology become impossible in 2010? Tata was under immense pressure. In 2007, oil prices were record highs. By 2010, they'd crashed. Fracking made oil cheap. Electric vehicles requiring massive infrastructure benefiting utility companies got heavy government subsidies. Compressed air, no subsidies, no government support, no profit model, so it died. Again. Let me be very clear about what I can and cannot prove. Can prove. Compressed air vehicles existed and operated successfully from 1870 to 1950. Hundreds were manufactured by companies like H.K. Porter. They were used in trams, mining, factories, or urban transport. They had clear advantages. Zero emissions, low cost, no fuel dependency. Multiple inventors in the 1920s to 1930s built compressed air cars. Gay Negra and MDI built functioning prototypes in the 1990s to 2000s. Tata Motors licensed the technology in 2007 and then abandoned it by 2012 cannot prove. That oil companies deliberately suppressed the technology, that inventors were threatened or bought off, that government agencies blocked compressed air vehicles, that there was a coordinated conspiracy to eliminate the technology. What I can say is this: there's a pattern. Every time compressed air technology becomes viable, it disappears. Not because it doesn't work, it works fine. Not because it's not economical, it was profitable for decades, but because it threatens an industry worth trillions of dollars. Now, let me address something from the book I'm working from. The book mentions California airships of 1852. I need to correct this. There were no California airships in 1852. What the book is probably referring to is the mystery airship wave of 1896 to 1897. In November 1896, hundreds of people across California, Sacramento, San Francisco, Oakland, reported seeing a mysterious airship in the night sky. It was described as cigar-shaped, 150 feet long, with canvas wings and a bright searchlight. Sightings continued through 1897, spreading across the Midwest and Texas. Some witnesses claimed to see the crew. Others heard voices. A few said the occupants were not of this world. Most people at the time believed it was a secret inventor testing a new airship. Patent attorneys claimed to represent the inventor, but no one ever came forward. The airship sightings ended in mid-1897, and to this day, no one knows what people saw. The first powered airship in history was Henri Giffard's steam-powered airship in France in 1852. Not California, France. So the book's reference to 1852 California airships appears to be a mix-up of two different events: Giffard's 1852 airship in France and the 1896 to 1897 California mystery airships. I wanted to clarify that because accuracy matters, but here's what is interesting. The 1896 mystery airships were described as having technology that didn't officially exist yet. Powered flight, electric searchlights, speeds of 70 miles per hour. The Wright brothers wouldn't fly until 1903. Zeppelins wouldn't fly until 1900. So what were people seeing in 1896? Some believe it was a secret inventor who disappeared before revealing his work. Others think it was mass hysteria, and a few think it was something else entirely. I don't know. But I do know that advanced technology has a way of disappearing right when it threatens established industries. Let me tell you one more thing that doesn't make sense. Compressed air as a power source is not some fringe technology. It's used everywhere, right now, today. Pneumatic tools, air brakes on trucks and trains, pneumatic cylinders in factories, compressed air energy storage systems. In 2020, a researcher at Ontario Tech University developed an isothermal compressed air vehicle with 74% efficiency, nearly as efficient as lithium-ion electric cars. The technology exists, it works, it's proven. So why aren't we using it for transportation? The official answer is, it's not practical. But that doesn't explain why it was practical for 80 years and then suddenly stopped being practical exactly when the oil industry became dominant. Here's my theory. Compressed air is too simple, too decentralized, too independent. You can compress air anywhere. You don't need a grid. You don't need gas stations. You don't need rare earth minerals from conflict zones. You just need an air compressor. And that's the problem. An air compressor doesn't make anyone rich. There's no recurring revenue, no supply chain to control, no monopoly to enforce. Gasoline makes oil companies rich. Electricity makes utility companies rich. Hydrogen makes chemical companies rich. But compressed air, it makes nobody rich. That's why it disappeared. Not because it didn't work. Because it worked too well without making the right people wealthy. In 1879, compressed air trams started running in Nantes, France. They ran every day for 38 years. No emissions, no fuel costs, just air. Then they were replaced by electric trams. Why? Because electric trams require a power grid. And power grids are profitable. Someone has to generate the electricity. Someone has to maintain the infrastructure. Compressed air, you build a compressor station once, and it runs for decades on water or wind power. That's not a business model. That's independence. And independence doesn't fit into an economy built on dependency. I can't prove there was a conspiracy to suppress compressed air vehicles. What I can prove is that they existed, they worked, and they disappeared at exactly the moment when oil became the dominant industry. And every time someone tries to bring them back, like Guy Negre in the 2000s, the technology mysteriously fails to reach the market. Maybe it's just bad luck. Maybe compressed air really is impractical, despite working for 80 years. Maybe thermodynamics and market forces naturally favor gasoline and electricity. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a reason that simple, decentralized, fuel-free technology doesn't survive in a world where energy is supposed to be something you buy, not something you compress from the atmosphere. The compressed air trams of Nantes are gone. The H.K. Porter locomotives are in museums. Guy Negre's prototypes sit in a warehouse in France. And we're told this technology is impossible, impractical, inefficient. But the people who used it for 80 years would disagree.